This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You're tuned to The Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And hot can't describe the news that is burning up the NBA wires right now. But in the meantime, in a more joyous state of mind, let's just remember that this will probably be the last time that we record the Baseline NBA podcast without my man, Mr. Warren Shaw, my brother from another mother, as a single entity, so to speak. So enjoy it, relish in it as we give you a great show. Let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my man, 50 grand, www.shawsports.net, Big Kahuna PNC, Mr. Warren Shaw, ripping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Are you ready to form like Voltron?
I like it. I do. I like it a lot. But, let's just hope that, my nuptials will not impact my analysis. If so, hopefully only in a positive way, as I will be adding more, family to the fold. And hopefully they'll be able to inspire me to bring more content, great content here on the NBA Baseline show. But nevertheless, as always, salute to all the fans, listeners of NBA Baseline, especially you, my dude. Going to be in the wedding as well, too, in a week or so's time. Can't wait to jump into this week's show as some ish has just hit the fan. We're actually re-recording as we are talking because it went down.
As if they could not make our jobs any more complicated, right? Like our minds need to be focused on a wedding and a ship. And this does not feel like the Love Boat right now.
Not at all.
Not at all. So listen, if people are not aware, over the course of this passionate re-recording of our podcast, it is just broken down, and this will obviously be the topic of our conversation in the breakdown. Tom Thibs has been let go by the Minnesota Timberwolves. So we will get into all of that craziness. And then back to the normalcy of the NBA, like, I don't know, the Houston Rockets are running buck wild on the NBA. James Harden is playing at an all-time MVP-like level, and we trying to understand how he doing this without his man Chris Paul. And then while we are also on the topic of normalcy, we just feel that it's so egregious that there are a couple of players in the game right now who don't have homes. We call it the NBA homeless. We are about to find homes for a couple of dudes in the NBA. So definitely check that out in our subject of the drop. Great show. Once again, we appreciate everybody for hanging in with us here on the Baseline NBA podcast. Be sure to get my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA or get at me at GameFace Lee. The show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline, available on all the major platforms. You know where to find us. You know where to be. Download that platform. Allow us to be your go-to resource discussing all things happening in the association. You know how we do, and you know how we roll. Let's get it started right now with a breakdown.
Time to break it
down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Callie Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And the topic of conversation here in the breakdown. As if we didn't want to make 2019 hot enough already as it is, the Minnesota Timberwolves have decided to part ways with Tom Thibodeau. Now, I might be saying part ways is a really nice PR twist to really what seems to be an all-confusing situation that has led to this happening, right? Like, Shaw, explain to me, if you will. But I thought that you usually fire somebody because of something that is just so apparent, something that's just been, on the surface, like tension in the locker room, losing the voice of the players, the players going out and losing by 46 points, something like that. The Minnesota Timberwolves just finished stomping a mud hole in the Los Angeles Lakers, and then they chose, now of all times, to say, we're done with you, Thibs. What in God's name is going on right now?
Yeah, this is some BS on all levels. Prince is turning over in his grave right now as a result of this organization's just mishandling of what they're trying to do in general. I mean, if you don't like Tom Thibodeau, then say you don't like him, and that's fine. But the timing, once again, we've continue to see this throughout this NBA season. The timing is just so curious. Why now? 22-point win at home against, yes, the LeBron-less LA Lakers. But you're 15-12 without Jimmy Butler. A couple games under 500, struggling to get back into the playoff picture in the Western Conference. So things are okay. I mean, maybe they're not as great as you want them to be, but somehow, if their expectations are that this team, even despite and remember, they're also getting a ridiculous effort from Derrick Rose now as well too, and I think that's a direct result of Tom Thibodeau wanting to bring Rose into this lineup. Things are heading in a pseudo right direction for them. But now you go ahead and fire this guy, and the rumor is, from various reports that Fred Hoiberg might have the inside track. Once the dust settles down here a little bit, but Minnesota is right up there right now in terms of organizations, in terms of dysfunction. You're approaching Phoenix, you're approaching Chicago, you're approaching New York Knicks level right now with the BS they just pulled with Tom Thibodeau.
And I think the thing that really stands out to me is that this was never about Jimmy Butler, right? This really was never about Jimmy Butler as much as it is about Tom Thibodeau. Clearly, Tom Thibodeau um, is just has just rubbed off the wrong way against the organization in itself in a way that they may feel like, okay, this is the perfect time where they think that they can cut bait, right? And I just don't think that it looks good on all accounts, because usually when you do this, we have to start questioning the head coach. The only thing that we've really been questioning is, can Tom Thibodeau coach and also handle executive decisions or personnel decisions as an executive president or president of basketball operations, or whatever the label that they wanted to give him. We didn't know whether or not he can handle both at once, because we have seen the trend of when we have coaches doing that. Van Gundy, and then most recently with Doc Rivers, one of which now is only still a head coach in the NBA. Usually, when this type of thing happens, they just get rid of both positions from that dude. They just get rid of the dude altogether. I just find it interesting because there's really no clear explanation as to why you choose to do this. Because even if what you're saying to me personnel wise, that it was idiotic for Thibs to give away Jimmy Butler for Saric and Covington and those dudes, that team still has played good basketball. You don't feel like you've totally been robbed because you no longer have Jimmy Butler. I look at this basketball team and I still think that they are competitive. They're only a few games out of the 8th spot, right? And I don't see there's been any kind of contentious relationship between Karl-Anthony Towns and Tom Thibs. So there clearly has to be something between Thibs and the organization that led to this firing.
Yeah, well, I'm just gonna go ahead and read some stuff here. Let's just go ahead and get into it. So, not to avoid your question, but I think as the news comes in, let's just go ahead and report it. So, assistant general manager Andy Greer has also been let go as a result of this. Scott Lee, then somehow he remains the general manager in Thibodeau's firing. But I'm going to read you some comments directly from Glenn Taylor, as reported by Christopher Hine, who's very close to the Minnesota Timberwolves, organization. All right, says Glenn Taylor now speaking. I said, let's let it go and see how things worked. And I think now we've gone up through halfway through the season, and I don't think we're where we thought we would be or where we think we should be. We still have hopes to getting to the playoffs. I think with half the season left, let's see if this change will now make a difference. I'm just looking at the results. The results are that I don't think we should have lost against Phoenix or Detroit or New Orleans or Atlanta. Maybe one of those games we lost just a bunch of we lost just to a bunch of teams that were better than. These are the words from Glenn Taylor as reported by Christopher Hine. So, with all that said, the expectations are through the roof for the Minnesota Timberwolves. Never mind the fact that they're 15-12 since the Jimmy Butler trade. Glenn Taylor is highlighting losses against teams like Phoenix, which you can say that's a bad loss, but New Orleans, I think going against Anthony Davis, I don't have any problems with a loss like that. But nevertheless, they are nitpicking and they wanted to go out here and make Tom Thibodeau the fall guy, and he has a part to play. Like let's not fool ourselves. He has a part to play in this. But nevertheless, the way that this has went down now, he becomes almost a martyr in this situation because I don't think anybody feels like this was handled right. And only a guy like Fred Hoiberg, who Glenn Taylor is friends with, that's the only type of player now, only type of coach now who's going to go to a situation like this, which seems so toxic. Yes, Towns is talented. Yes, Wiggins is talented, and Jeff Teague is serviceable, and Derrick Rose is resurgent. But nevertheless, this is a team that you have to like Glenn Taylor if you want to go and coach this situation because it's straight trash that's going on right now in Minnesota.
Well, okay, so So here's something that I guess resonates with me with what you had indicated. So to me, the one thing that I think that just stands out from all of this is Taylor is scared. I think he's looking at the situation of what's happening with Anthony Davis, and he is scared of what may happen with Karl-Anthony Towns. And if he doesn't believe that he's getting the most out of his player with the dynamic that is with Thibs and with Karl-Anthony Towns, he's going to make a play from his end to change the narrative that he's willing to do whatever it takes to get this team in a place where he can be comfortable when time comes for Karl-Anthony Towns to make decisions about his future, that it should still be with the Minnesota Timberwolves.
Well, that's very interesting, right? Because
thank you. I listen, every now and again, I like to give interesting things. It doesn't always have to be crazy conspiracy theories all the time.
But it's wild because AD, he's eligible for Supermax, blah 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 blah, and it's like next summer he can be out. They just signed Towns. He's locked up. So unless you're fearful that he's going to, pull a Kyrie on you and like, all right, well, I'm going to hold out and I'm not going to play at all. Like this isn't the NFL. Like that doesn't really happen really in the NBA like that. And the other thing too that I'm thinking about is Tibbs is, I don't want to say I don't think he's a disciplinarian that maybe he was 4 or 5 years ago, right? But he's obviously a very hardline coach per se. Now you want to bring in Hoiberg, who basically was running a country club in Chicago, right? Into a team that lacks discipline, has been questioned about how hard they play. You want to bring in that guy to be the head coach? What the what the f? Minnesota and Glenn Taylor, you are wilding, you are tripping. And as much as I like Cat, and I want Wiggins to live up to his potential, I just don't see this working out right now. And yes, it's reactionary. It literally just happened as before we came on air. And maybe some dust will settle, and maybe some other things will happen. But this seems very, very, very just stupid. I'm at a loss for words. It just seems stupid. And if Hoiberg is truly the guy that they're going to bring in the situation, well, I can't wait. Michael Jackson meme with the popcorn. I can't wait to see what goes on with the situation.
All right, so let's go ahead and push this forward, right? Let's really talk about the overall impact of Andrew Wiggins, and the other role players, Dario Saric. What is that saying to these guys? Because those guys are the type of players that we can't call where their trajectory is going to be now again because of the change of play, the state of play, right? So that to me is where I'm looking at this, because I sometimes when owners when they make these kind of decisions, I really sometimes don't know if they're really thinking about everybody that's involved. And what I mean by that is just the team itself. Okay. There are certain players that I think are going to be all right. Okay. They came in with controversy and they'll probably leave with controversy. Okay. Because they either are going to be great players playing under, for a team organization, a great head coach or whatever, or they're just going to be great on their own. Right. We talk about, guys like Allen Iverson. We talk about guys like Carmelo Anthony, right? They're going to be great players. Guys like Blake Griffin, they're going to be great players. Whether or not they will have hardware that attributes to that level of greatness, or we just look at their numbers, they're going to put the numbers up. So I'm not worried about a Karl-Anthony Towns. But guys like Andrew Wiggins, who were first-round lottery draft picks, a guy like Dario Saric, highly recognized as one of the great international guys in the game, that to me, it speaks volumes about this kind of decision-making process. You know what I'm saying? And it's just, it tells me that for one good player, you could be sacrificing the rest of that team.
All right. Let me calm down. So you mentioning Shark, I think is interesting, because maybe that is a change, something that on our show have screamed for previously. It's time for Taj Gibson to just be relegated to the bench, and let's let that ship sail. Maybe Sarge now comes in with Hoiberg, and takes over the starting power forward situation, and they try to build around that young core. I don't think you're not getting anything more out of Jeff Teague. At that point guard situation. Koji, the young guy they drafted. What can he now give to this team? But at the end of the day, it's not about developing those types of players. To your point, is okay. What's on the roster? What's good enough now? Because clearly management thinks that this should be a playoff team. Management, by some of those
Hey, Shaw,
comments,
I'm
think
sorry.
this.
I'm sorry, Shaw. Can you restart that, because freaking Chad just called and that I recorded.
Okay.
Sorry.
So restart.
Yeah, restart.
So what you said there, is going to make me calm down just a little bit. So one thing that could potentially happen with Hoiberg taking over at the helm, if he does come in, because he hasn't been hired yet, so this is just forecasting, um, but whoever it is, maybe they finally let this Taj Gibson situation go to rest, and they bring in Sarge now, who they did trade for, and have him be the starting power forward alongside Towns, Wiggins, Robert Covington, and I guess Jeff Teague. Um, the rest of this team, there isn't a whole lot really to develop, and the team isn't trying to develop as much as it is trying to win. Really and truly, this is ownership feels like they shouldn't lose to teams like New Orleans and Detroit, so that they should be, one of the teams in the fighting for a home court advantage in the Western Conference. It seems like. I don't know if that's realistic based on the mentality of what they've shown thus far. But now maybe a new direction, maybe get some other guys better looks, put them in better opportunities, and that's all you can hope for. And I'm sure that's how they're going to try to spin it, right? That's what they have to spin it as. But overall, I'm bullish. I'm very skeptical on what's going to happen here with the Minnesota Timberwolves moving forward. But I hope they know what they're doing. And that we don't see the best years of Cat's life kind of wasted, in a roster and a team that's just kind of toiling around. Because does he become Kevin Garnett truly 2.0, in Minnesota, where everyone is picking Anthony Davis right now as Kevin Garnett 2.0 in terms of the league? I think Cat is really going to be, maybe even walk that path even more so. But he also has a role to play himself in terms of being a more accomplished leader and not just putting up, outrageous and egregious stats. Can he be a guy that can lead a basketball team into the playoffs now that Jimmy Butler is gone, and now that the coach is also fired? Who else is left? Now it's on you and Wiggins to get it done.
You bring up an excellent point about how this is going to adversely affect Karl-Anthony Towns, right? Karl-Anthony Towns now is kind of embroiled in the controversy of who is going to steer this team in the proper direction. And I think it's important to note that usually when you have a good basketball team, head coaches are willing to sacrifice the state of play to come in, and they believe that their influence, their understanding of the game, their schematics, and their strategy is what will enable them to step in and guide this team in a better direction than what the previous head coach and their staff has done. But that dynamic can only happen when there's a level of trust. And I guess my bigger question is, how, if you are Karl-Anthony Towns, can be expected, how can you as a player expect yourself to trust anyone from the organization on down to whoever the new head coach is, that they know what they're doing, when how this was done speaks volumes to either a level of desperation, a level of incompetence, or a level of or a lack of understanding about the what it says and how it resonates to the rest of the players in the locker room. Another dangerous dynamic from this, Shaw, that I think people need to take into consideration is if Karl-Anthony Towns, because let's remember, the owner Taylor loves Karl-Anthony Towns, loves this guy, right? What if the murmurs in the locker room are that this firing has anything to do with maybe any personal conversations or meetings or discussions between Towns and the owner, right? Whether it's true or not true, what is that going to say? And if you are Karl-Anthony Towns, even if that wasn't true, how do you quell that idea or that premise, given the circumstances of how the communication dynamics have been on that team in this organization over the last 3-4 years under Tom Thibodeau.
Well, let's think about it. What level superstar do we perceive Cat to be? Do we see him as the informed guy that management is going to come to and say, here's the direction that we're thinking about going into? Or is he just a guy that things happen to, as a result of being on the team? Yes, he's an all-star level talent, all NBA talent, things of that nature. But do they view him as a franchise player where they need to say, all right, Cat, what do you think about this? And I'm not sure where it stands. There's one thing that we do know for sure is, when the Jimmy Butler situation kind of reared its ugly head right before the season, that's when he was willing to be like, okay, now I'm willing to sign an extension. So there does seem to be some communication there. But to the depth of that communication, I'm not quite really sure where they're at and how much Cat really has in terms of, making decisions for this team and this roster. And if he has any, really, I don't think he has the equity because let's be honest, they didn't get to the playoffs without Jimmy Butler. While Karl-Anthony Towns is a major part of what they're doing, and if you have to bet on the future, on this team and what it's going to be, they did make the right decision. He's younger, he's more talented, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But they haven't done it without Jimmy Butler yet, right? So he doesn't have the equity for me right now where it's like, okay, I feel like I would have to be going to him and saying, all right, well, what do you think, Kat? How do we go about doing X, Y, and Z? F that. Prove it. So if Glenn Taylor and company are operating, as management typically does, and doing things on their own, I don't have a problem with that so much. But again, what they did today specifically is just seems very, very, very off. And we'll see where the chips end up lying with Minnesota the rest of this regular season.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Right now, no topic is hotter than the firing of Tom Thibodeau. And let me make an emphasis of this. I use the word they've let him go. No, he has been fired, right? Like, I guess that is the connotation here because there usually seems to be PR differences in how we're discussing this. I'm just trying to be generous in saying, they let go, part ways. But no, the idea is that he was fired. So now let's go ahead and flip this, Shaw, and let's talk about Thibs. What does this do for Tom Thibodeau? We often talk about how the idea or the premise of recycled assassins come into play when we talk about NBA head coaches. We've been a proponent of, we need to let some young blood come in here and have an affluence on the game, right? You got guys like Brad Stevens, who come in who have a great effect on the game. A guy like Tom Thibs now, this is his second go around, even to the degree that in his second go around, he was given an additional role to help a franchise and an organization. Maybe it might not have been the best choice for him, but what does this do for Tom Thibodeau? The viability of him being a legitimate head coach and helping a basketball team be more than just when we thought of the greatness of him as a defensive assistant head coach in helping those great Celtic teams in the 2005 and 2006 and forward teams under Doc Rivers. What are we talking about now with Tom Thibs' legacy?
His legacy, I mean, what he did in those early years in Chicago, I think is, it's something that is legendary. It had its time. It had a place in the NBA history, like the way he orchestrated that defense and icing and all of those things. But the league has adjusted, right? And he's needed to adjust, to a changing league that seems to change and evolve every 4 or 5 years anyway. But what he did at that time, again, yeah, he'll be remembered for. But if nothing else, it was a trend that has now, served its time. Now, what he does next, I very much, I mean, we're probably not going to see him on the sidelines this year, and he may take some time off again, like he did the last time he was like going to Chicago. But we may see him on ESPN, doing some analysis and things of that nature. And he's good on TV. He's actually really good. He's got an engaging personality that a lot of people don't think he has. But at the same time, what happens for him in terms of the coaching situation, well, that also remains to be seen. What happens with this regular season and the playoffs. Does anybody else get let go? I think he has itch. I think he's going to want to coach. But this has got to sting. This has got to cut very, very deeply for him. Especially having an elevated role. Bobby Marks from ESPN tweeted out as well too that he doubts that we'll ever see this again. The Van Gundy thing didn't work out. The Doc Rivers thing didn't work out. We might be done seeing, coaches with dual roles in terms of front office leadership and responsibilities, in addition to coaching on the sidelines. So if that's something that he's going to be holding out for again, I doubt that. I think he's just going to want to stick to the X's and O's, but it's got to be a good situation. Obviously, he's not going to a rebuilding team or something like that. It has to be somebody where he can come in and get them over the hump, a la like how Coach Bud seems to be doing right now in Milwaukee, or a team that is already successful. And like I said, just is looking for a change of pace as well too. But this is a bum deal for Thibs. Although again, he gets a lot of criticism for how he runs players into the ground. He's gonna have to make some adjustments as well to what he wants to do if he wants to have another coaching gig sometime soon.
But do you think but do you think that means that it's too late? I mean, in other words, you don't. I guess I'm trying to pin you down on the premise that there are going to be teams who immediately want to see him coaching a team come next year, right? Like, so we already know that teams like the Brooklyn Nets, barring something egregious going on, everyone's happy with Kenny Atkinson, right? We know that Fizdale is going to be there come next year. So those are two teams that are out. Is there a team that, given what we already know about Tom Thibodeau and what he is capable of, that they should really consider looking at as being the head coach come next season?
It's hard to figure out something right now because we have so many changes, and first time coaches and people coming into play. Um, Maybe you could look at Washington. We've talked about them a lot on the show in terms of what they end up trying to do. Is that a situation that changes at some point? Does Memphis feel comfortable with Bickerstaff? After making him changing from interim to the full head coach, would they make a change so soon after a year's time? I don't necessarily think that they would. And then obviously the the big question, obviously in New Orleans with Anthony Davis as well too. So do they try one last ditch effort and change coaches? And bring in maybe a guy like Thibodeau to coach AD and what they have going on there. Those are only situations I can think off the top of my head that would maybe potentially open up this upcoming summer and give Tibbs an opportunity that might be right for what he wants to do and what the organization is trying to do as well.
Conspiracy theory for a moment. What if Rick Carlisle and Cuban say part ways amicably? And maybe Tom Tibbs might see himself coaching, say, the Dallas Mavericks. Would that be an intriguing offer?
It's I think it's an intriguing to get his hands on Luka Doncic and see what he'd be able to do with that, and even a guy like DeAndre Jordan who can maybe fit into some of the defensive schemes and principles that Thibs believes in. But I just believe, I've said on the show as well, that Carlisle is a guy that when he wants to go is when he'll go. I can't imagine. It just seems like they have a very, very great understanding of each other there, that ownership and Carlisle and even Dirk, as a franchise's best overall player, as to what they're trying to do. And I think everybody is going to leave on their own terms, and no one's going to get embarrassed. So yeah, I understand what you're saying. If they do it amicably, sure. But I just don't see Carlisle right now in a situation where he's going to want to leave Dallas, because again, they just got a shiny new toy in Doncic, who could be the next, or he's looking like the next great player that the Mavs have had. You can eventually rival Dirk at some point. I know we're only 40 games in or whatever the case would be, but he looks like the real deal. So I'm sure Carlisle's going to want to test that car out a little bit here, and see if they can add some pieces around that and see if he can build his own personal legacy along with what the Mavericks have done under his leadership.
One other team. Hey, Doc Rivers, I'm sure he loves, reunions. Out there in LA, yeah, it's possible, right? Get him on as an assistant coach. You know what I'm saying?
So I heard an interesting thing today, as you discussed that, Doc apparently, the coaching tree is very, very tight knit, and the Clippers had played the Orlando Magic. So Doc I guess he got wind of Steve Clifford being let go this summer, and was prepared to offer him a position on his coaching staff. But then Orlando came calling, and Clifford took the head coaching job there and is doing a decent job there down in O Town. So I think he wouldn't mind at all, reaching out. He and Thibs are very good friends, almost brotherly. Like they are really enjoy each other's company. But you just have to understand, like we'd have to understand what Thibs' mentality is. Does he feel now he can go back and take a back seat? Is he better suited as, a defensive coordinator, quote unquote? Or does he feel like, listen, I've come too far and accomplished too much now to go and be a sidekick to Doc? And although, that might be putting it loosely, he's been the head coach, he's been the president of operations. Can he go now and be an assistant coach now, just kind of in charge of one thing? Forward thinking though, so they might be able to try to come up with a role for him. They hired Lee Jenkins from Sports Illustrated, for God's sake. So you never know what's going on out there. But I think that is something that I'd be a little bit surprised if Thibs went in that direction, as to go and sit on somebody's sideline as their assistant.
All right. Well, the era of Tom Thibs in Minnesota ends in a purr when we were all hoping for Thibs to lead the Wolves to a mighty roar into the playoffs for a second straight season. That has been cut short. Tom Thibs has been fired. He is no longer the head coach and no longer the president of basketball operations for the basketball team moving forward. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. This was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And this week on The Drop, we've got two interesting topics to get into. The first topic is what the heck is going on in Houston right now. James Harden is balling out of his mind right about now. And he's doing it without Chris Paul. This is a team that has ripped off 8 of their last 10. And in that time span, James Harden has been playing at not just an MVP-like level, but as I want to be a back-to-back NBA MVP type level. And he's doing it at the expense of making us question if the Golden State Warriors are really legitimately the team to beat in the NBA. Is this sustainable, Shaw? Is it sustainable what we're seeing from James Harden? And if you're Chris Paul, do you upset the apple cart with how this team has functioned without him?
Well, it's interesting, I think, when it comes to what Houston has been able to do, because they started their run, their turnaround, so to speak, with Chris Paul in the lineup. I think they had won something like 5 of 6 or something like that with Chris Paul. Then he went down, and then Harden was already starting to pick it up. So when you listen to some of the people out there, the analysts and things like that cover Houston, it's like, all right, well, are they better without him? Or is this just too much of a toll for James Harden to have to do this? To score 35, 40 points a night to get it done and to get wins. And well, he can. He's proven that he's capable. Just like how 2 years ago, we're like, all right, if OKC is going to win, Westbrook's going to have to average a triple double. He did. So you're talking about an elite player here in an elite time of the NBA. Doing elite things. And right now, I have to give a lot of props to James Harden, specifically Mike D'Antoni, and what they're able to do and how they're able to just kind of make sure that they always get the right matchup for Harden. I mean, he goes and looks and he picks out who's going to run the pick and roll with. It's not a complex system, but they run it to perfection. And yes, he gets the benefit of the whistle here and there as well too, but he has to make those shots. He has to, make the plays in essence to get these 40-point outings and damn near triple doubles that he's been averaging over the last 10 games or so.
I mean, over the last 10 games, he's been averaging 40 points, 6 rebounds, 9 assists per game, right? So even in the losses, James Harden is playing at an MVP level. Even in the 2 losses, he plays at an MVP level. And I think what's important that for people that people have to understand is this isn't the same dynamic as when a Carmelo Anthony gives you 40 points, maybe 5 or 6 rebounds, and had given you maybe, 4 or 5 assists or anything like that. James Harden's game is built in a way where he has it set up so that he is okay with shouldering the weight, but he is giving his team every opportunity to make shots. And it's not exemplified by him having to make assists. It's exemplified by how he draws attention to his game. The defense draws attention to him, right? Most people try to make the same analogy with a number one wide receiver against defenses. If a defense is going to choose to double team the top receiver on the opposing team, that means that there's going to be one guy left open, a tight end, a slot receiver, another flanker on the far end of the field, or however the offensive scheme is set up. And to me, it's a direct reflection of what we're talking about here with the Houston Rockets. And listen, kudos to Mike D'Antoni. I know we'll get in a little bit about the D'Antoni effect, but kudos to Mike D'Antoni because he clearly is in sync with James Harden. This is a different dynamic that I'm seeing from the head coach to his star player about how he is being utilized and the way that he's playing. Now, his minutes are definitely high. He's averaging about 39 minutes over the last 10 games, but that clearly is with necessity because this was a team that was below 500 until before they went on this run. So ultimately, until this team is clicking on all cylinders and everybody is contributing it in a way that you can minimize using James Harden, or even until when Chris Paul comes back. The fact that James Harden is showing you the versatility of why his offensive game plays so differently in this NBA now than the way that we can make comparisons of other guys who would put these kind of numbers up and it would seem like selfish and even at the best situation would be a 5-5 record out of 10 games. This to me is a dynamic of why we keep saying that James Harden is going to wind up being the MVP again, or at least he is a top conversation for being MVP again because of how his game plays right now.
Yeah, at one point I think we were definitely all getting a little Harden fatigue, a little Westbrook fatigue. Just the cycle of the NBA is it's vicious where at some point we just start to penalize good players because it becomes old hat. Listen, you're good. We know you're good. And while we may praise you in terms of like how we watch a game on Twitter and like, oh my God, yeah, LeBron is still good. Oh, Curry can still hit those threes. When it comes to awards, those things seem to have a shelf life. It's just like, yeah, all right, well, listen, you got your MVP now. All right, we know you're good. No, you can put up a bunch of stats. Cool with it. But right now, I think with what the Rockets were, especially how they started the season, and what were they? They were like 10th or 12th in the Western Conference. They've worked their way back up to 4th. Their offense was tremendously bad. They've worked their way to right now being 3rd in offensive rating. Harden has an insane usage percentage of 39. His percentage is 39 right now, so obviously tops in the NBA. But they have to, again, they're getting it done. Offensively, defensively, they are still very, very, very much struggling. And as the course of our podcast here on this show, we're going to have some themes that kind of permeate that even tie back to what some things Houston may be able to do. When it comes to Carmelo, if they get rid of that contract, some other guys they can move in as well too. But right now, things are going in the right direction for Houston as they climb their way again up to 4th in the Western Conference. Harden solidifying himself right now as the midseason. I say that right now, the midseason MVP by most people's accounts.
Oh, by most people account. I mean, he's averaging 33 points per game, and if he continues to play at the level that he's playing, he's going to wind up being, he's going to wind up taking the NBA scoring title, no question, hands down. There's something that's interesting though that sticks out to me, Shaw, because I think then this is what brings in the dynamic of what I asked earlier before is, can the Rockets be a better basketball team when Chris Paul comes back? Not because we don't think that Chris Paul and James Harden cannot be a successful tandem, because I think we've seen that they are capable of that. They were basically one game away from proving how lethal a combination these two guys are to the best team in the NBA, which was the Golden State Warriors a year ago. But because of the fact that these guys have had to learn how to earn their keep with James Harden and without Chris Paul, to get the kind of shots that they're getting, and for the Houston Rockets to execute in the way that they're executing, can a guy like Chris Paul come back and upset the apple cart because of it? Or can it all flow succinctly? Is there a common element that they can find where Harden can ease off a little bit, still be at an MVP level, but Chris Paul coming in is that X factor effect, and it doesn't change the dynamic of how these guys are playing around James Harden right now?
Well, I mean, in the beginning, again, they'd struggled this year specifically with their offense and Chris Paul not looking completely healthy, not looking right. We know what it was last year. Like they were I don't know, they had like a 78% winning percentage or some foolishness when Chris Paul, Harden, and I think Ariza were all healthy and all played games or something stupid like that. So I feel like Paul may now, because the age really does seem to be kicking in, he may be needing to take a lesser role, and he may not be a guy who can give you 20 and 10, 18 and 10 even. But if he goes out there and continues to hit the mid range at an effective percentage, like which is one of the main reasons they brought him, and can still knock down the three and help them push the pace, and then hopefully, you just gotta hope, and I think in some ways that his age and his injuries don't hamper him to the point where he can't play solid or at least timely situational defense. Because that's something that this team is sorely missing, and along with the leadership as well too. And obviously Harden is going out there and being a team leader by his play. But I think Chris Paul is more the vocal leader when those two are both out there playing and running the gamut, so to speak. But the main thing is that Chris Paul can also help them defensively as well too, as long as he's not too banged up. So yes, I think he can come back and be a contributing member that doesn't upset too much of what they're trying to do. Again, Morey said they're going to be buyers, at the trade deadline or even before that. So you may get some additional help into this team, into this roster as well too. They're trying to move Brandon Knight, but for right now, with what they have, right now James Harden and Clint Capella, who's having another, really basically an all-star type season with him averaging 17 and 13 pretty much. Those two guys are really, really manning the ship. Eric Gordon's been in on a lineup as well too. So that makes what Harden's doing with this team and especially these last 10 games, it makes it that all the more special because they have a lot of guys who's not contributing. So they need a guy like Chris Paul to come back and help them out.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Topic of conversation: the Houston Rockets. Are they the most dangerous team in the NBA at this moment in time? So, and I guess I'm posing that question, Shaw, because I think when I think about that game, in which the Houston Rockets, they basically knocked the Golden State Warriors into reality, so to speak. I wonder if we're not giving enough praise for what the Houston Rockets achieved by beating the Warriors, or are we selling ourselves short on this premise or notion that the Golden State Warriors, it's going to be a much tougher climb for them to be what we were convinced that this roster comprised should be by the time that we get to the second half of the season? In other words, that the struggle is a lot realer for the Golden State Warriors than even we had anticipated, and it's directly because of what happened to them a few nights ago against the Houston Rockets.
I think I'm cautious when it comes to Golden State primarily just because I don't anticipate them to have interest. We've talked about this, numerous times on our podcast that we just expect them to have interest in the regular season. That said, you do expect them to get up for certain teams, and blowing that game against Houston in the fashion that they did, with even some referee help, with KD stepping out of bounds and not getting called, that's concerning. But they still have a pseudo ace in the hole, with Cousins potentially coming back. And although we don't know at what level and, what percentage of health he'll be back at, that's still a nice safety net to kind of fall back into, in addition to the fact that, they can turn it on proverbially. But Houston is a team that is going to give anybody fits, especially with the way Harden is playing, has been playing, and is capable of playing throughout. The question with him is always, does he disappear at some point as a result of getting frustrated or get too physical with him? Then does he disappear at some point in the playoffs? And you have to hope that that's not the case. But we're a long way away from that, and Houston's team will probably look a lot different today, in early January than it will when it comes to the playoffs in April. But again, I think they are not afraid of Golden State, as evidenced by this game earlier in the week, as well as evidenced by last year's Western Conference Finals, where again they almost won that thing. So I think Houston is right there, and they are a very, very dangerous team, no matter where they land when it comes to the 1-8 seed in the West.
So you're not sold yet that the Houston Rockets are still the best suited basketball team to play against the Golden State Warriors? Like, in other words, I guess what I'm alluding to is, even if Daryl Morey is considering getting another piece by the trade deadline, this roster in itself can't sustain in a 7-game series against the Golden State Warriors the same way as, say, the Denver Nuggets, or say the Portland Trailblazers, or the Utah Jazz, or the Oklahoma City Thunder. Do you legitimize how this team is playing under James Harden to still be a legitimate threat to the Golden State Warriors, more so than us delegitimizing the Golden State Warriors in intensity of playing in a regular season game rather than it being in the playoffs?
I think the short answer is with Houston, just they don't play enough defense for me right now. So I feel like while they went into Oakland and got that win on the
So
road
so you don't even so
with
you don't
all
even
odds
so you
against
don't
them,
even but you don't even buy into the idea that the Houston Rockets can improve themselves defensively, right? Like, you're
not their
not
current
sold on
roster.
the guys that they have, that if it's needed for them to get stops, right? So we're not talking about 2017 Houston Rockets defensive commitment while still being offensively explosive type team. You're talking 2016 or 2015 Houston Rockets, where they just go fugazi shooting the basketball all over the place and making shots, but ask them to stop the opposing basketball team, and you have no, you're not confident that they're capable of doing that.
Because the playoffs are a different animal. Like, that is tried and true. And we know, even without having to see it right now, that Golden State is going to play better, barring injury. They're going to play better in the playoffs. And they have so many weapons, and you have to figure out ways to neutralize or make it as tough as you possibly can, for all the weapons that they have, they can throw at you. And Houston does not have enough people that are defensive minded enough, and D'Antoni isn't defensive minded in his schemes as well, to make it difficult for them. So they need to go out there and get the talent, just the raw talent, the physical players who will go out there and be able to help them and assist them in that. So right now, in OKC is better equipped, because of the defense they play. Where they may not have a James Harden. Well, they have Russ and PG. So offensively, those two guys can probably equate. And then PG's playing elite defense right now in the NBA. So those are teams that I look at when it comes to, like, all right, well, who can go out them offensively as well as keep up with them defensively, at least a little bit. Although right now they're not as good as defensive they used to be in terms of Golden State. But I really do feel like Houston needs more on that side of the basketball before we can be talking about them being a true challenger to Golden State in this upcoming or this season right now.
Given what you've seen from the Houston Rockets, Shaw, give me a player that, in James Harden's mind, from the bench, is indispensable. Meaning, Daryl Morey cannot and should not move this dude unless it is like, unless you telling me that you getting him Anthony Davis, unless you telling me that you getting Kawhi Leonard type dude or whatever, which I know is not even conceivable. But even in the most outlandish aspect of things, who is indispensable to James Harden's success off the bench?
Well, I think that's kind of a loaded question for me because
Fully loaded.
off the
Tony
yeah, I
Matterron
mean,
fully loaded. Absolutely. I completely,
off the
yes.
bench, there's they don't really have much that's coming off the bench right now. So I don't think anybody is indispensable, off the bench for them. PJ Tucker starts. So I mean, if I'm going to look at a guy for the most part who's indispensable, I think it's probably him. Well, obviously, with Capella is probably first and foremost. But Tucker, what he does, trying to help them and spell Ariza and even what he did last year, he's picking up a lot of that side defensively. At least is trying to. So they just recently signed Austin Rivers. He's not indispensable by no stretch of the imagination. And then obviously Eric Gordon, who gives them a shot in the arm offensively and can play decent defense, again, when engaged as well too. So I guess if it's off the bench, it's still going to be Eric Gordon, like by the letter of the law. But I think their most important player right now is probably, well, again, I don't want, that's overstating as well too. The guy, to answer your question, that's important to them is going to be PJ Tucker. But y'all, he doesn't come off the bench.
You're tuned to the Baseline. Callie Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA, and our top. This is the segment of the drop where we just finished discussing the hot Houston Rockets. They are just straight up blazing right now. Other topic that we wanted to get into, Shaw, which I thought was pretty clever and important. There are a couple of players right now in the game who we kind of feel a little, I don't know, feel some kind of way about, man. Carmelo Anthony, J.R. Smith. These guys, man, they were permanent fixtures in our NBA over the last 7, 8, 10 years or so, right? And the fact that these guys are homeless. No, I don't mean homeless like, they ain't got a place to stay or whatever the case may be. I'm saying they don't have a team to play for. That kind of NBA homelessness, man, just don't feel right. And now the Memphis Grizzlies have cut bait with Chandler Parsons. And I feel like the NBA homelessness rate is on an uptick. What can we do to get these guys in homes? Not shelters, but in homes. Find a home for these brothers, man. What's up with this?
The NBA truly is a copycat league. It's just like you see these situations arise and things that you don't necessarily hear about, in years past, and all of a sudden they become like, oh, well, that team did it. Well, we can do that too. So Carmelo is away from it, just creative differences, if you let's call it. J.R. Smith is away from his team, and now the Memphis Grizzlies are going to be away from Chandler Parsons as a result of some issues in terms of his development. He says he's ready to rock. This is kind of like the Kawhi situation last year, where the Spurs thought Kawhi was ready to rock, and Kawhi said he wasn't. Now it's the opposite. The Grizzlies want Chandler Parsons to go down to rehab and play a couple games for the G League affiliate. And apparently there's some mixed results on what was really there. Some saying he's willing to, some saying that he wants to continue his rehab in LA until he's ready to come back to the big club. Who knows? Either way, right now it's come to a head. Chandler Parsons is going to move on from the Memphis Grizzlies. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means he's only $38 million over the next year and a half. And it's going to be very, very hard to find a home for Chandler Parsons. I think in a perfect world, we're talking offline, where we could just maybe, chess piece these three guys, put Carmelo in Memphis, put JR in Houston, as Houston had some interest in him previously, and then put Chandler Parsons in Cleveland as a guy to kind of go out there and maybe try to rebuild his career a little bit now and play alongside Kevin Love. And, he can go out there and be a quote unquote air quotes real. But the contract of Parsons makes all of that problematic. And I don't know how Memphis is going to find a new home for him, because I can't see him giving up any of that money unless Memphis is willing to pay like $36 million of the 38 that is owed. And then maybe he'd say, all right, I'll take a buyout for that much and then try to find a new home elsewhere.
Well, the thing with Chandler Parsons that I think sticks out to me is when Chandler Parsons came into the league, when he was playing for the Houston Rockets, we actually, had an affinity for his game, man. We weren't able to tell whether or not he was on the top end of the spectrum where there's so much potential for him to be a great NBA player, or whether or not he would be considered as, an expendable or as a has-been. But what we did know is that the guy played with heart. He hustled, and it translated into that dynamic where this guy has earned his keep. This guy deserves a lot more respect than I think that he's getting. And now we're at a state where when we look at Chandler Parsons, we tend to wonder whether or not he is now become extinct because of the way that his position is being utilized and how they play his position. That he is only good to play in a dimension, play one dimensionally. Whereas when I make the comparison to someone like a Carmelo Anthony and a guy like J.R. Smith, my concern is that these guys have always proven to be offensive juggernauts. They may be risky. They may have nights where they just don't have it, right? It could be a hit or miss, but you can always be guaranteed that they can figure out a way to put the ball in the basket. And for me, when I think about people who are, and I don't want to try and make these type of comparisons to our modern day society and the way that we have these kind of conversations, but I think about the mentality of people who are just downtrodden and on hard times because of circumstances that they can't control, that they have to get themselves out of, and those that do have choices, that have the ability to make adjustments when they need to in order for them to do what they should be feeling passionate about doing. I feel is where these two dynamics separate their ways, where guys like Carmelo Anthony and guys like J.R. Smith, because they don't characterize and they don't present themselves in a way where they're willing to adapt to how the NBA utilizes their talents, it makes them less attractive to basketball teams that you would think would and should be using their skill set to advance themselves further throughout the course of a season, or maybe even more so in a playoff scenario?
Well, I think JR is going to have the highest market value of all the three guys mentioned here, because of the three, he's the one who plays the best defense. And that's not saying he's an amazing defender, but at least he has the ability and willingness to try on that side of the basketball. And in an era where you need to be able to shoot the three, but you also need to be able to play D, Carmelo and Chandler Parsons haven't lived up to that. Parsons again has the biggest issues because the contract, number one, and the health, number two. He's just not playing. So who's going to take that investment on, knowing that okay, he's a day from getting out of the bed and his ankle turning the wrong way for being out from the season again. Like that's really what it's been for Chandler Parsons. Carmelo, it's an attitude issue. JR, you can say maybe it's an attitude issue, but it's right now it really is just for Cleveland. He doesn't miss what they're trying to do. But Parsons really just seems like a guy that has the requisite talent. He's the youngest of the three, but he's really not that young. He's 30 years old. But I still feel like talent-wise, he can still maybe get somewhere if his contract wasn't so big. And there are a couple of teams that could potentially use his services. We've talked about maybe a team like Toronto bringing him off the bench. But again, this is not we got to wipe the number away. Let's not talk about that. Just where's a potential fit? So Toronto coming off the bench potentially, maybe even New Orleans, Portland. They still searching for a small forward. Kind of starting, some mixed match of guys out there. New Orleans, as I alluded to as well, too. So those are a couple of teams that maybe he could go to, if you weren't able to do the perfect scenario that we said earlier and just put him in Cleveland and move everybody else around to those respective teams.
When we're talking about teams like those, Shaw, to me, it sounds like you're more privy to the idea that maybe playoff potential teams are better fits for guys like J.R. Smith and Carmelo Anthony. More so than maybe with Chandler Parsons, because I personally believe that Chandler Parsons would be an ideal fit for a team like the Milwaukee Bucks.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, though. It's all about a mind state, and accepting a role. And while yes, he knows he can score, maybe not so efficiently, but he can definitely score. The capacity in which he's asked to score is what has always been the issue. Any team that's showing interest in Carmelo Anthony at this point has to know or has to come to an arrangement with him is like, okay, you know what, and what they assumably did in Houston. You might get 10 shots tonight. You might get 4 shots the next night. We don't know, but it's going to have to be kind of like game flow.
Man, this is just remarkable, man. I now understand why it's so difficult to be an agent in the NBA for the NBA. It's just absolutely mind-boggling because yes, your first priority is to your client, but you can't tell me the client ain't making the situation easy. You know what I mean? Like, it's a good thing that they get their cut up front, because man, the real work for these dudes is gonna be after they are on the back end of their career. Most guys, they probably would just hang it up and say, you know what, call it a career, call it a wrap. But there's just that innate ability for guys that have played the game that still want to play the game. And they want to continue, they want to play it until somehow they can leave the game on their terms. When unfortunately the game is dictating the terms in which they're going to have to leave. So. Yeah. This has been one phenomenal show, Shaw. I mean, I cannot tell you, man, so much happening, and especially with the news of Tom Thibs, it's been totally bananas, bro.
Yeah, it absolutely has. And, I don't think we were prepared, to get this lit right in the beginning of the year. But thank you, Len Taylor and the Minnesota Timberwolves, for making our show a little extra saucy and spicy as the new year begins. We hope all of the fans and listeners enjoyed it. And we'd love to hear your thoughts on the firing of Tom Thibodeau. What do you think is next for the Minnesota Timberwolves? What do you think is next for Thibs himself? And also your thoughts on the Houston Rockets. And, of course, the NBA homeless, although they still getting them checks, though, JR.
Yeah, we can't do this on our own. Right, man. We can't do this on our own, man. Like, we definitely need y'all help. Let's find a home for Chandler Parsons, Carmelo Anthony, and J.R. Swish. Once again, man, we'd like to thank you and yours for tuning in with us. Happy New Year to y'all. For the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.